Welcome, Sebastian.
Hi.
I find it funny that this message of the recording is in Portuguese.
Very interesting. I had to restart the recording. It actually told me today that the transcription failed to start, so I stopped and restarted. So we should be good here. We do have 5, so that's going to put us right at that quorum number. And let me get sharing. Sorry.
Okay. So welcome to one of the bi-weekly, I think, calls, right, from OSC. Tech's already sharing the topics, so maybe I'll pass the floor to you.
Yeah, give me just 10 seconds here.
Or maybe I can, for the contribution letter and the project incubation, it's 2 documents that we've been circulating. If you don't have them yet, let me drop them on the chat. 1 second. And goal maybe could be that we have a few minutes to look at them and see if anyone can share some thoughts, and maybe we can align to make use of our live time together.
Probably the only thing that I would speculate or add here is that as far as formatting, that will change, obviously, to match the format that we have for the other documents. So this is still rough from that perspective, but the meat and potatoes is what we're really looking at here. I'll take a step back. Let me give the importance behind these once again. The contribution ladder, we are trying to get finalized or approved by the committee, because this is actually going to define who is eligible for the maintainer retainer program and at what level, or how do you move through each level of contributions to get yourself eligible for a program like that, or again, just more active in the ecosystem. So this is something that we do want to make sure that we have as a staple. And again, this is going to file right into what we do for budget perspective. So once we have this, we can give a brief view in one of our next budget presentations. It's just going to give more depth to that proposal. So I'll hold the project incubation one to stay on the same topic.
I see we have Newman contributing there, but I've never seen him on these calls. Was he in a previous iteration of the group, or?
Newman has previously been on a call, yes.
Yeah, the thing is, this document was shared in, I imagine, in several scenarios. One of those was Gimbals in the working group we have there. So Alex, it's one of the contributors to the open source committee, but also is a main contributor to Gimbal Labs. So he shared this document, and our members, one of those was Newman, put there some time and work on the document.
By the way, guys, I dropped on the chat my introduction. It's a common practice in these calls. If you could just, even for recording it for anyone that doesn't know each other, please drop us a line saying what your biases are, what your organization and your involvement in the OSC. Does anyone want to add something? So basically, this started a while ago. Who authored most of this that can speak a bit to it?
Don't see Alex here. I know Alex was a big part of it. Uday may have seen some of this here as well. I don't know if he has anything to add.
Not really to add more. Yes, I think we work together as developer advocate, and a lot of input came from Tex and also from Christian. So I think it was a good teamwork.
Okay, personally, I need to go over it from top to bottom. So what's the time frame on this text? Can we aim for next meeting? We try to close it, or should we do it async?
So it would need to be pretty strong async. So between this one and the next one that we're going to talk about, so contribution ladder and the project incubation, these documents hold up everything that we have to do for the rest of the year. And that's more coming from the open source office perspective. But without these documents finalized or approved by the committee, we are in certain terms without a way of working. So what is in here in that sense is what we are going to grade by and create other documentations and forms by for applications for who wants to be at a certain level, and obviously ones that we can watch and see because we can track all of that with Paterja. So yeah, if we can get it done by the next meeting, because that's what we need, that's absolutely great. I would say redline the heck out of this thing if that's what's necessary. Without taking too much time, I'm going to get to Adam here. I mean, we can also carry on some of this discussion in the meeting. If you want to cover the other topics first and circle back, that works too. Adam?
Yeah, I don't know if this was largely written by ChatGPT, but this sounds like somebody's college research paper, as evidenced by 22 different reference links at the bottom of the document. This doesn't seem like a guide for how you contribute clearly in the Cardano ecosystem, and more like somebody wrote a research paper about how contribution to open source software works. Like that. So I don't really know what and where this fits into the Cardano open source ecosystem.
Okay, there's another document or set here, Sebastian.
Also, we have links to like Gimbal Labs, like, so like this could very well be a bad look that we're indirectly advertising a particular organization within the Cardano ecosystem. So like there seems to be some strong bias showing here.
Yes, I read the document several times. It's a really well done document, really well fundamented document. My impression is the ideal situation is maybe Alex could be share with us some kind of their impressions, his impressions about the document. But my impression is it's a really well fundamented general framework to understand how the contribution ladder works in general. It's not that technical application yet, but it's the general framework. So,
but it's not a framework. It literally just lists the different roles and then challenges that they may face, but not how you go about progressing up. So it's not a ladder if you can't climb it.
Agree. I think that's the next step. That's the next step. But this document gives us a good general field to start building on top of that. It's my opinion. And in regard to Gimbal Labs inclusion in the document, I agree. We can delete the fragments that reference to Gimbal Labs. That's no problem at all. The document is consistent without the reference to specific actors in the ecosystem. Thanks.
I've just shared an evolutionary from this document. This is again from the developer advocates. So using some of what is in the framework here explains how somebody would make their first contribution. Still double checking for other documents, but I would say there's a little bit of freedom here for us to copy and paste. But yeah, if there's more feedback that says that we need to completely restructure this document, then we just need to know green highlight, red highlight, what's good, what's bad from the committee perspective.
Okay. I think we're going to need to really be active on Slack and on the documents to get somewhere if we're going to close this on 2 weeks from now. So I'll be on top of that, and I'll try to make sure we progress. And I encourage anyone to drop things on the document that currently is titled Contribution Ladder. Thanks for the link for the next one. I'm saving it right now, and I'm gonna pass. Who's the first one to raise a hand? Johnny?
Johnny?
Yeah, just to echo some of Adam's sentiment, whenever I was reading through it, I was reading through different levels of the ladder, right? And then it said what the concerns and problems that each level of the ladder could face in their existential life at that level of the ladder. And it did strike me as an odd thing to be reading. Because it's kind of saying like you're going to have a horrible life for all these potential reasons, and didn't seem to be focusing on the latter aspect, as Adam said, of like how to go from this level to this level. It seemed more like a description of each level and its potential pitfalls, which was still a very interesting read. And I definitely agree with a lot of the analysis about what could go wrong and burnout and like feeling isolated or this or that. But like, it was interesting because I went into the document thinking it would be more explicitly talking about how to move up a ladder, and it turned out to be like a more existential document than I was expecting.
Christian?
Yeah, sorry everyone. Sorry I was late. Getting caught up in another call. Yeah, this is the first step towards getting there. So this is kind of framework to kind of like how we did or styled the incubation. So we have a life cycle framework that grades the categories. Then we get into the merit associated to progressing through each level. So I kind of wanted to
Are you
get
talking
something
about
similar
the
for this
one-
going.
None
Sorry,
of
are you
that
talking about
is
the
addressed
contribution
in this
ladder?
document.
What's that?
We're looking at the contribution ladder, and none of that concept of progression or anything is in this document. Like literally,
no.
it's a description of 4 different tiers you could assign to people and difficulties and problems they'll run into, and that's all that's addressed in the scope of this document, and then a bunch of references to how they arrived at those conclusions.
Yeah, it's a stepping stone to getting the framework established, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't understand what framework we're trying to establish because it's not.
There's
laying
4
one out.
roles, and what we want the roles to clarify, and then actually use that information to build the criteria for each of those. So this is the first step, which is the analysis of why we're proposing these roles. If these roles are okay, then we can establish the framework for what's in the ladder, and then the categories for each. So that was my idea with it, if that makes sense.
Right, but I'm not saying justification. I'm saying a very brief 1 or 2 sentence description of the 4 assigned roles and then problems they might face. There's no like real frame. There's not a framework in this document.
Here is my original thing for it then. The actual doc explaining why the contribution ladder. And then this is the analysis for the 4 proposed. And I will personally curate it then. I have the developer advocates on this one.
So how did the slides articulate with the doc? Sorry.
So the
Yeah,
slides
same
are the
doc.
original proposal of what the contribution ladder is supposed to be, why we need it, and then a brief description of what each of the roles are. Then I had the developer advocates go explore the avenues of those different roles to see if it was accurate within the Google slides of what I've seen in other open source environments. I want us to curate our own story of what the contribution ladder should be for Cardano and the different avenue paths. I just copied something that's general, and I had the advocates go put together what should be in Cardano, and they kind of lined up with the same roles that was proposed. Nothing really deviated from that.
Guys, do you think we've consumed like a third of today's time almost? Before we pass the mic to raised hands, do you think we could use this time slot 1 week from today and have an extra session just to close this document to mature it?
Yeah,
Are you okay with someone?
I just don't view this as like a valid output. Grading somebody's homework is not really the scope of the open source committee. So if somebody wants to publish this document,
no, I'm
by all means go ahead. But we can't adopt it because it doesn't lay out any policy for the Cardano open source ecosystem to follow. It's literally a research paper. So there's nothing for us to ratify here. So unless it's massively reworked, which I don't see happening within a 2-week time frame, I don't see anything for us to even take a vote on with this document as written.
No, let's reset it. Next week, I'll have a more formal doc, or the next session. I'll take this as my slap on the wrist for not peer reviewing it intensively, and make sure it curates back to the original message. But the Google Slides are the default go-to of what the intended outcome is, and we didn't get that. So I'll make sure we get that.
Okay. So Christian, if you need any help or if you want to meet 1 week from today on an extra session on this, I would be very happy to be on it and to try to help you and also to be in the loop to understand it a bit better.
Yeah, I'll run it through our
Maybe
next agenda call before we add it back on.
We have the project incubation. Does anyone want to say anything before we transition to the project incubation work? Or
Yeah, this one's a little bit more complete, a lot more complete. So feel free to come through this one quite a bit more. Well, this one you guys can actually really tear apart. I mean, if there's something that's not really working right, then that's what we need to know and fix. Project incubation started under the project life cycle, and so there's still information, or has been information for a long time, on our Gitbook page about this. So if you've had your chances to review through that page, you should have already seen some of this. This is again just that formalization of putting pen to paper. Basically, what we need to know is that each stage where we've accepted it, where you've agreed to for the open source office to accept a project, right? What are the different criteria that they need to meet or be achieving within that? And at what point can you ask us and say, hey, is this happening or is this not? With, in most cases, what should be documented proof. And you guys can make a decision that says, yes, they're ready for the next stage, or no, they're downgrading or declining or whatever. So.
Quick mention, we did not get specific with the actual metrics. We kind of left it as an open thing for the OSC to tell us what we should be measuring specifically. And we can rely on Jurg too, because they're a metrics provider, about what other ecosystems do too, for speciality if we want to get there.
Johnny?
So what you're saying is we need to, as members here, we need to come up with like the thresholds by which things get to the maturity phase enough to move up to the next level.
Well, yeah. So the incubation, there'll be projects that propose to come in, and there's 3 tiers they could land at. The least one should be more open, less specific, but covers basics for us helping foster open source culture. And then you have the in-between, which is certain things that they should meet. And this, I think, is where they potentially could qualify for OSC funding in our budget when they're in that growing phase. And then the mature phase is where they are full-fledged. And that's what justifies the spending of maintenance contracts on like Cardano node, et cetera, for us to classify projects and justify it to audit causes, things like that.
And what you want us to do is to determine the threshold by which it moves from one phase to another. So from incubation to growth to maturity, and then maybe also do an assessment on whether or not it's declining or has been abandoned as well, which was the further part.
Yes. So other ecosystems like Hyperledger, they do have annual project reviews to determine whether a project stays within its lifecycle framework. And the other thing too is with these, we need expertise that isn't my own to determine what's a vanity metric, what's not. Like, I don't know if we measure GitHub stars to say a project's mature or not. So I want to avoid things like that and get into things that matter. And you can't necessarily by each project go by the number of contributions per se. Because if we were to use like Cardano coin selection, I think it's an archive, shouldn't be a mature project because it's just a reference set. So things like that to mitigate.
Yep.
And
So,
I think
I
these
guess
docs will take a good month to get through, probably.
Tex?
Yeah, I was going to say that I don't want to counteract too much, but I would want to say that we're not necessarily asking the committee to specifically come up with a threshold. This needs to be generalized in a certain aspect where it can be applied to any type of project that it is that's coming in. The decision-making piece is you all at any time. One of the things that's going to become a regular part of the agenda here is what projects are we actively working with, right? Now, is that going to be something where we're going to go and list off every project in the meeting? No, that would be an expectation of homework that you all would bring. But you would bring it and you would say, hey, I've seen this project. I don't really know what it's doing. I don't know how it's doing. I think we should really dive into this one. Or I've heard or I've seen other things and this becomes an issue. Those are the types of things that we would highlight, and you all are just decision making. But what we're asking now is, do we have enough in this document, or is there something that's missing that gives us that general guideline for what a threshold should look like? I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, jumping in, I was going to say very similar. I don't think we can put any. Once something has 27 stars, it becomes mature, and like I think that's going to be very subjective and needs to go on a case by case basis. At the determination of whoever the current committee is at the time. So this, again, if we're looking at it as a framework for how this program runs over the course of multiple years, hopefully this membership body will change and adapt, but they can use the same framework and just keep the process rolling. So, but yeah, so definitely need to fine tooth comb it. I think we should absolutely have this on the next meeting schedule, but then probably, like Christian suggested, look at maybe ratification in about a month after really reviewing this, because there's already plenty of comments from you alone, Tex, let alone once we all start getting in there and tweaking on it. So, but yeah, this looks like a framework. So this is much better start.
The other caveat, Adam and Johnny got to see it earlier, which is the incubation workflow. But the other ratification is this will come down as an OSC recommendation because we have to partner with the TSC to validate it and make sure it meets their technical requirements and our open source practice requirements, since it affects Intersect as a whole. So, and the incubation workflow, Adam, I like too much detail. So I know it's confusing, but just go top and around. Best way. Would anyone like me to 3 minutes to run through the workflow just so you have the higher level process?
I like that. Yes.
Okay. So to also add in, I do think it is ugly, but we already have 2 projects, quote unquote, that have already submitted, and I've completely laid out to them nothing is accepted until we get the acceptance criteria. But it could be something that we practice with for reviewing. But the way I opened it up, and this may cross-pollinate with other committee initiatives or working groups, is you either have open source libraries, products, or community recommended projects that could submit to this. My initial idea was like post Catalyst for a project to come incubate and mature more after they get their MVP. But the things I think that they should have as inputs into the process is their vision, problem statement, their initial foundation, maybe even an engagement strategy, compliance and government alignment for how they run the project. That could be a little overkill, but feedback, validation plan, and a roadmap with value propositions potentially. And then you get into the pre-submission steps, which is they need to read what the incubation process outline is, which would be a subset coming out of the stock. Ensure their criteria is there prior to submission. And then something I like that the CNCF does is that you actually assess where you think your maturity is on the scale. And then that gives the committees kind of an idea of where they should be evaluating acceptance criteria to start with. And then obviously it goes through the OSC process to get on the agenda. We convene, review the process. If the project doesn't meet the requirements or not accepted, we send it back to them and they can reapply. If it does get approved, we put together our recommendation and send it over to the TSC to also convene, and then once you have the TSC and OSC alignments, then the project gets adopted, and then there's outputs there on the left for supporting things that the OSA will then engage with that project and help set up. But that, I don't know if we need to add in the product committee into this as a subset. But the other thing to tying in with the TSC initiative with the tooling work group was even having working groups peer review projects before they come in. And that's where I was thinking, if it's a product, you have the commercialization working group that can help peer review and get those kind of things set up. The open source library working group, and there's developer experience, which is coming online. And then we could even have tooling. Basically multiple things that ensure your highest rate of success coming through the committees. That's kind of the initial idea. Feel free to hate it or love it.
You've just reminded me that there was a meeting this morning that I took a screenshot of, but never added to my calendar, and therefore didn't turn up. How did that meeting go this morning?
The meeting
actually,
or that is actually getting rescheduled because of a conflict with Lorenzo being out of office, and none of us will be let into the meeting. So it should happen tomorrow, and we'll circulate. I know Sebastian had asked to be a member of that group, or had volunteered to be a member. No, it'll probably be a different link because Lorenzo owned that first link, and he's out of office, so that was part of the problem.
And we'll make sure he enables sharing this meeting.
Well, that benefits me because I plumb forgot.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be an hour after today's meeting ends for this open source committee. So in about an hour and a half, and it's getting rescheduled to same time tomorrow. So that looks like it is 1600 UTC.
Oh, so even though it was a morning time, it wasn't UTC, so it would have been after. Okay, so
yeah,
wow.
It was 9 a.m. my time is what you were seeing when I shared the link.
It lines up for me because my hotel checkout's at 9 a.m. So I can actually pack. No.
What kind of hotel has you check out at 9 a.m.? That's disgusting.
A resort. We went to a sales pitch and got a free stay. So.
Oh, timeshare, huh?
Yeah, a little $400 too. Anyway.
All right, moving on.
Next item on the agenda.
Guys, just one thing. Christian, if you could, like, I'm going to try to get familiar with this, but at looking at this, and imagine we're talking with some projects and we're trying to get them to engage with Cardano. This material needs to be, this workflow, for example, that you have is good already. But it's very internal, right? So we need something, I think, more middle ground for someone that we're trying to get engaged with Cardano, I would say.
Absolutely. And that's why I didn't want to publicize yet until we actually have a process for them to flow through. Now we do have the submission form, which we have sent out a little bit, which just clarifies things that they need to add in generally. I think the OSC went through that previously with the lifecycle framework. And that was just standard. But if there's things we need to tweak to it, we can always do that. But I wanted them to know the acceptance criteria before they submit for how they'll be evaluated, because I think that will help them structure their inputs into the submission.
Okay, so for the whole forum of today's call, is the action that people revise and give opinions on the Google Doc still just that?
Yes, I will take the contribution ladder off. I'll rework that and resubmit next week. The homework then is we're moving on the acceptance criteria, and please chew through it because this is the project's life depends on this, I guess you could say. And we need to make sure it matters to both us and Cardano as a whole. Because the other thing is if we're taking treasury funding that potentially could also support these projects, we need to make sure it's well justified. And that's where these two initiatives complement each other. Trying to give a risk mitigation to the contributors themselves and the actual projects.
I think it would be really important to include a link or even a snapshot of this workflow on the top of the incubation document.
Okay, I'll do that.
Let's
or
go
a
to
text
Hans.
probably would have already done it for me.
Jump in, please.
Hello, me?
Johnny?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I was going to say that's a very good idea. Like put because at the very bottom of that document there appeared a workflow, but not at the top. And I think having people have that in their heads to begin with, going into the document would give them something to think about while clarifying with the more detailed text. But yeah, also like I'd very much advocate for like doing a dry run with the committee on something that we know is going to have a specific position, so that we have an idea of the process running through the workflow itself, so that prior to public submissions we can explain it to people having done it in a practice run.
Absolutely. Just to clarify, the 2 projects were from Emergo, and I think we have one coming from Anastasia Labs as well. So,
But once we get public queries about how this works, it would be nice to have gone through it and then be able to very easily refer to our own experience of how it works to educate.
Right. So, Johnny, are you
Adam?
with those 3 projects that we have in the pipeline and working as a committee to correctly position them? Would that count as going through it, in your opinion?
Yeah. In my
Okay.
opinion, that would, because it's something we already know needs to be placed. We go through the exact process. We have that experience of having done it as a group. And then if anybody external on Twitter, for example, says, but how does this process actually work? We have had 3 direct experiences of going through it and categorizing and properly assessing, and then we can more confidently answer those questions.
Okay, yeah, and we definitely the other point that I was going to make was that we definitely have some repositories that are currently owned by Intersect that got kind of dumped on us by IOG that could definitely use a good assessment for maybe they're ready to be put into the abandoned or archived bin. Like Christian was mentioning, Cardano coin selection is one that instantly comes to mind. So we have probably a few different good example cases for the committee to review an existing project and determine which bucket it should probably be in. Like if you haven't touched your issues or a pull request in 3 or 4 years, you're probably abandoned.
Christian? Okay. So let's try to work on this one async and then online on the next call. Next point is direction to revise the OS strategy. So I'm going to drop on the chat, but like Tex was contextualizing in the beginning of the call, the 2 documents we've been talking about this call today are the main ones that we need to work on. But eventually they're going to flow into our strategy. And that's why it's important that we get on with those so we can get to these, which is the strategy. I'm dropping it on the chat. And we have the old one, which was last year's. And we need to revise it according to everything that we're defining. So this is really just to give you this horizon and to start looking into it, getting familiar with this so we can get to it. Thanks.
Yeah, mind the formatting. I'll work on getting that fixed here momentarily. But I was going to say this actual task should be pretty low E for everybody. It's really just take out what doesn't apply to 2025, and because we accomplished it in 2024. Some of that will come from obviously myself and Christian, but there's some of the things that you all should be aware of. And if you don't know that clearly happened or that was clearly successful in 2024, then it's probably something we still need to leave and continue working on in 2025. So it's really good that you all have, whatever level of knowledge that you have, that kind of approach here. But yeah, when I say low E, I mean, it's really going to be a comment to say, per what we put in the charter or per what we know what we're working on, this needs to be in here because it's missing. And we'll realign those goals. But when I say low E, I mean let's get those other documents finalized, because again, everything hinges on us really starting to work into that paid open source model that we showed you back when everyone was getting onboarded. So getting those 2 first. The strategy, it was last updated in May. We don't have to update that in January, right? I would say as long as we get it done by February and March, we're going to be okay. But yeah.
I'm not sure why a lot of lines on this document are just going endlessly to the right and not wrapping, but
I'm going to fix it.
yeah, Christian, thank you.
Just to clarify too, if everyone finds it useful, before we did the strategy, which is our long process, Sandeep and I had interviewed several people in the community with concerns that built into the strategic pillars we focused on. So if you feel like it, I think we already went through the mission and vision and updated that in the charter, so we'll update the strategy to reflect that. But it goes into pillars that we focus on, which are like general areas, and then strategic milestones we aim for, and then action steps to that. So that's the kind of the strategy workflow process in the doc. So think of it from that point. When we change the pillars, that affects everything else on the bottom. But the pillars need to line up with our mission and vision and the target audiences. And I'll link Sandeep's document as food for thought. But if y'all feel like we need to redo a sentiment analysis since it's almost 12 months old, we can do that and then do the strategy post-review the survey. That way we're still doing the other two docs in the meantime and still working on the strategy feedback. And then, because we still have, the strategy went live in April, so theoretically that's the renewal timeframe if we want to keep it to a year performance.
Robin?
So, yeah.
Hey, I was wondering, since I was reading the goals earlier today in 2024, if we should put some, like, maybe schedule some time for reviewing, like, what was achieved, what is missing, and what items do we pass over, and what could be dropped, and like a review of goals and assessment of what has been achieved.
I'll get that together for you next week. I guess we can make that the first agenda item. I'll go in where we were in 2024, what lagged over, and then we can plan 2025.
Cool.
And then I wonder if we do that as a what do they call that? Quarterly business reviews. And then our performance is associated with that too, since that's also part of the strategy.
That would be good. Sounds good. So I think that's it for this one, right? At this point. Next we have the something we discussed on the previous call, which was a review of the formal decision for Cardano addresses. Maybe I'm going to pass the mic to Adam to follow up on this, please.
Yeah, so I'm sharing a document that I've been working on here in the chat. This is just a brief summary of kind of what we had arrived at after the last meeting in terms of transitioning the Cardano addresses repository to Cardano Foundation, who volunteered to take over maintainership. So for anybody that wasn't here, just a quick refresher, we discussed a couple of different options, including fully transferring the repository over to Cardano Foundation's ownership. But instead, as a committee, we kind of settled on Intersect would maintain ownership of the repository, which would also allow us to retain ownership of the licensing of the IP, so we can ensure that it's always under an open source license. But we're going to basically give CF full admin over that repository and set them loose so that Arnaud is kind of unhindered by our processes in terms of maintaining and proceeding with development. So if that looks good to everybody, these would be kind of my recommendations to Christian to execute, since he is one of our master admins of GitHub, is to make sure Arnaud gets all set up and all the permissions he needs to get unlocked in that direction.
You say delete the GitHub?
Yeah, exactly. Rug it all. So yeah. But yeah, so as long as everybody gives that or has no objections, I guess, since we already kind of got a consent or consensus during the last meeting, we should be good to proceed. But it was a long holiday period. I may have mistaken or overlooked or forgotten something, so please, by all means, give it a quick review. Go ahead, Johnny.
It sort of relates back to the previous thing, but comes off of this. Like we've established here that the Cardano Foundation people are going to run the permissions on this, which is good, while still maintaining ownership under the Intersect banner on GitHub. But going back to the previous thing about establishing the phases of an open source project and therefore its level of support that it might get from budgetary considerations, does that mean that someone applying who already has a GitHub repository and has full management of it would have to fork it into Intersect's ownership in order to receive budgetary funding? Or
Not necessarily was my hypothesis. So the way I structured the proposal, at least, was half of it goes to the core projects, which are like 26, and then that leaves 25 potential projects open for us to be available to. The two that keep coming up are Lucid and Mesh.js. So potentially other projects can fund that. But I do want it to be an open banner to the OSC's discretion about what we provide, as long as core Cardano is in consideration.
So there'd be some sort of meta thing that does an analysis of the phases for independent things as well as Intersect hosted things.
Yeah, at least that's my idea. I mean, we just have the budget requests together, and I have a framework, but we still got to go through the process of how we, or the documents for how things are evaluated, and a submission process or community feedback into what should be supported.
Cool, thank you. It's just that it was interesting because we've ended up in a position of retaining Intersect ownership over a thing while also opening it up for full maintenance and permissions from an external entity. So like that, I wondered if that hybrid would end up becoming a standard.
Potentially. I mean, it also, now that would definitely, the framework is definitely in the OSC. I'm interested to see if the TSC or product committees do something similar. The incubation program, I want to leave it optional to where people can join Intersect. They still get their IP. They just do somewhat similar of a like marketing arrangement in a sense of where they get to use our banner, etc. I got to explore more of that. There's a legal thing with it, with us hosting it, but they can also leave at a certain point. Because I think the way Hyperledger did it is they take in your project, they pay a certain amount of like security audits up front, and then if you exit, you have to refund those costs. Jörg might know more on that, so I'd defer to his judgment. He's a little bit more expert on that than I am.
Thank you. Sorry if I'm dictating things.
Jörg, do you want to say a word about this on the person very briefly?
No.
Okay. Thanks.
That was a very brief response. So
let's go to Adam then. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I don't think that we should try to get into the habit of forcing everybody to essentially sell their souls to Intersect to get, you know, a little stipend cash on a monthly basis or something to maintain critical open source infrastructure in the ecosystem. So yeah, I would say that, but that's where we have to figure out and reviewing the incubation framework is really important to us so that we can ensure that projects can remain independent, but also that there's at least guardrails. Like if you're going to get money, it better have an open source license. You better allow outside contributions and not just be kind of like keeping it privately to yourself. So those would be the big criteria that I would be looking for to say, like, are you actually open source or are you a company or individual just trying to get funding for yourself, essentially?
Quick note before sorry, I interrupted Tex. The other thing too is we have to come up with this because also the practices by which other foundations use, I think it's the, what's the name of it, Jörg? It's with the OpenSSF for security badges. I think a lot of incubation processes adopt that. And they have a free scanning tool. And I did that across just core Cardano. And some of the projects were very friendly. Some of them were not. So I think we need a middle ground tier. And I had talked with Chris Robinson, who's associated with the foundation on that side. And they're trying to come up with a acceptance criteria measurement that we potentially could adopt, but it hasn't come to fruition just yet. So I'm trying to look for a Cardano OSC mandate of what these projects should have, with security also in mind.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to add with this, at least as far as I've seen, different projects that were coming to us are already at the stage where they are willing to either A, allow us to fork the code, or B, even donate the code to the core of Cardano. So that in certain lights, I don't have that full in writing from everybody, but that's the conversations that I've had, been a part of, or seen. And so in general, this is something where we may need to go back to the drawing board and just make sure that we're solid on what we're doing budget-wise. But the expectation is that Intersect would hold a copy of that repo, and if we are paying somebody stipend in the maintainer retainer program, that repo is under Intersect while that work takes place. Again, we can evolve and look at that as something different, but it would have to be extremely contractual. The open source licensing would have to match, and the issue comes there is the maintainer access there as well, because under the maintainer retainer program, that's something that we control, which is why it would be under Intersect for that purpose. So
the concern is people may not want to apply if they're having to give up that level of control. But even though it's open source, yeah,
they can still retain the IP.
Yeah, I imagine there would just be an inherent mistrust in some people.
It's going to be common in the Web3 environment.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the first and biggest thing is that presents a clear centralization risk, right? Because ultimately one admin named Christian at Intersect at the end of the day could rug the entire ecosystem, right? Like, because he could just delete all the repositories. So yeah, we definitely need to steer away from, you must give us ownership of your code in order to get a shitty little paycheck, because that's just not going to fly.
Yeah, no, I think
to be fair, that policy is not written yet, so that
I'm personally vetoing it, and I will take to the Twitter if I have to text. So
And
just don't even add it.
And the reason I raised the question in the first place was to end up vetoing it if it became a suggestion.
Yeah, I think it should be optional. And then there's benefits to, if you do go that route, that Intersect can more offer, something like that. It needs to be.
Yeah, we should have a path to adoption if somebody like wants to step away or is retiring and at the end of their career and doesn't want to maintain it in their own GitHub anymore. There should be a pathway to give it to Intersect, but not a mandate that it must happen.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that is a good place to leave that discussion. It's one of the core things of what we do here, right? But for today, we just have 10 minutes, and we have a bit of open forum and updates from developer advocates. Maybe I would actually start by asking the developer advocates if they have any questions, and then open the floor, and then ask them for more detailed updates if they have them. We have, I think, Uday, no?
Yeah. No question. Good, really, very quickly, kind of couple of updates. We're working on a repository for developer experience. So we just poked before end of the year in a different repository, and now we're supposed to update it. So that's work in progress. We will be organizing each of the developer advocate, organizing online workshops and webinar, and get ready for in-person event later on in the year. And I personally involved in a open source library working group as well, so trying to contribute there. So no question right now.
Okay, Uday, I'm gonna drop my link tree. If you could DM me, I would love to stay in touch about this, especially to get to see what you've been doing with the repo for DevX and get more in the loop about that. Okay.
Sure.
Cheers. Okay, so with that, we have an open forum for any topic that anyone wants to raise or pick up from what we spoke today. Any hands, any thoughts? I would take the moment to get back to Christian and say, again, on especially the contribution letter, ping me next week if you want to team up, and we'll maybe publish it to the group if anyone can join. Chris?
Yep, I'll get that together at least by Thursday next week. I'll make it paramount. The other thing too, which I think everyone may have briefly read it, the SWOT analysis that's in draft. Commercialization working group put that forward. Welcome to feedback, and I know I already copied some of Moritz and Jurg's questions about things that should be addressed. But if there's anything else we want to do to that, because they're focused as a support group for products, let us know, by all means. I'm helping curate their piece to it. But they also, I think another thing to this is they want to try and build an accelerator program, which is going to require committee participation too, as other options for projects too. Because the way we have things structured is open source libraries get a lot of funding, but the products themselves need to find ways to become revenue centric and try to get them to generate their own income without using treasury funding.
Is there a deadline for that where, like, if they haven't done it by a certain amount of years, they would no longer be eligible for treasury funding?
Nothing at the moment.
I used to do grants for volunteering community organizations from the National Health Service in the Northern Ireland, and we would have like a 3-year timetable of like government funding, and if you haven't been able to prove your self-sustainability by this time, funding ends.
I think that's a good thing we could instill within that framework. Because the other thing too is Pat Sheridan was the chair for it, and he's done a lot of the accelerator programs out of DC with universities there. And you need it to be able to prove the viability of the project goes through, and it was typically like 1 out of 100 would actually go through that process and succeed. Maybe we can do something similar, built off these things, but also have multiple channels people could provide through. Because I know some VCs already have their own independent processes, and we kind of just do a peer review and forward you along, or we actually have one that's hosted through our system. Completely open to suggestions.
Tex?
You'd of course have to run it by the DREP text as a stand-up.
Of course.
Yeah, are we done on this topic for the moment? Okay.
Actually, I had a question on it because I just was reviewing the fact that this commercialization working group apparently is under the open source committee, but we've never had an update to the committee on behalf of the working group. So when did we adopt the commercialization working group under OSC, and when will we get updates on what they're working on as the committee that's responsible for overseeing them?
So it started, Pat was originally chair of the OSC. He stepped down to run that, and Nick Clark came up, and that's how it got incorporated in because it was part of that initiative. And they were supposed to come do an update. And then we had elections and the committee got redone, and I forgot to follow back around. So Kyle Solomon's kind of the pioneer of it right now, so I can bring Kyle in.
Okay, yeah, because I've been here for a year and was not aware that the commercialization group was under the open source committee. So like that's very problematic for me in terms of having these working groups that are allegedly working and doing things, but they're accountable to nobody. So definitely worried about this kind of spider web of bureaucracy we keep seeming to grow in Intersect here.
Yeah, I'll make it completely transparent. They actually have their working group call tomorrow if you want to join in too. Lucas attended one recently as part of the SWOT peer review.
A couple of them, yeah. And one thing that I've also aligning with what someone, I think it was Robin, that asked a bit what we've done, what we're doing, and this kind of the working groups and everything needs to be very transparent to everyone in the community. So that's something that I'm going to try to contribute to clear up and decomplexify. That's the word. Thanks.
Yeah, just a reference, moving that meeting for tomorrow, just keeping it at the same time, it does run a conflict with commercialization and another working group meeting. So I know there may be some rigid schedules to work with, but if there's any consideration to look at changing that time, that might be better suited.
Well, the goal of that working group wasn't to invite literally everybody. The goal was 2 people from each committee to go and sit in, and because we don't want it to become death by committee for doing this triage. So so we have, I will be there because I don't have any other conflicts because I'm not going to the commercialization group. So and I know the rest of the technical steering group and most of the product is already on board. We've got.
So should I do the commercialization working group where I've been already twice?
Yeah, because this triage, we're just defining the process for triage anyway. We're not actually beginning the triage of products at this point. We're kind of figuring out how that group's going to operate anyway. So I think you're better suited doing commercialization, and I'll do the triage group tomorrow.
And I can sync with you beforehand, Lucas, because I need to join the other group just as a SME on questions if asked. So I can give pointers for what I think the goal of that call was supposed to be this week.
Okay, yeah. We're on time almost. Any last notes from anyone? I think it was a great call. We got to align. Looking forward to the next one, and let's progress asynchronously. Meanwhile, I'm going to try to go over the links or minutes of today, publish them as well with Terrence text, and try to make that transparent and async. We're going to try to publish the call to YouTube and keep people, working public or building public. I think that's it. See you next time. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.